For years, reports of Venezuelan cartels flooding the U.S. with drugs and violence have gone largely unchecked. Many Americans have wondered if Washington would ever actually take decisive action. Well, that moment may have just arrived. Donald Trump has now ordered a military strike force to directly target cartel operations linked to Venezuela, and if you think this is just another empty headline, you might be shocked at what's unfolding right now. A campaign that began with a precision strike on a drug smuggling vessel in the Caribbean has set off alarms across Latin America and in Washington itself. Reuters reported that 11 suspected members of Tren de Aragua were killed when U.S. aircraft struck their vessel off Venezuela's coast in early September 2025. The Pentagon described it as a precision interdiction, but critics say it marks a historic shift. America is no longer just intercepting drugs. It is hunting cartel operators with lethal force. And if you think this is just another headline, think again. The U.S. has deployed warships, Marines, and special forces to the region. Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, has called it an act of war. Neighboring countries are now choosing sides, and legal scholars back in Washington are asking whether Trump even had the authority to order such an operation without congressional approval. This isn't just about drugs. It's about sovereignty, law, and the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. What happened at sea was the opening move in something much larger. On September 2nd, U.S. Navy and Air Force assets intercepted what intelligence described as a drug smuggling vessel, linked to Tren de Aragua. The vessel was carrying cocaine bound for the Caribbean, with routes traced into the U.S. mainland. According to Reuters, U.S. drones tracked the boat before ordering a strike that left 11 people dead. The Washington Post reported that Trump personally announced the operation in a televised statement, calling it the first step in a campaign to destroy the cartels at their source. AP News noted that Pentagon officials described the strike as unprecedented because historically, U.S. counter-narcotics operations relied on Coast Guard interdictions, not lethal military force. The scale of force involved makes it clear this wasn't symbolic. Trump authorized the deployment of more than 4,500 sailors and Marines, supported by guided missile destroyers and even an attack submarine, according to the Financial Times. This wasn't a law enforcement raid, it was a show of military might. For cartels like Tren de Aragua, the message is simple. America is willing to kill traffickers at sea before they even reach U.S. shores. But what does this mean for the balance of power in the region? Cartels thrive in the gray areas where borders blur and jurisdiction breaks down. They exploit weak states and international loopholes. By taking direct military action, the U.S. is redrawing those boundaries. It is signaling that traffickers operating under the protection of hostile governments will no longer be treated as criminals alone. They will be treated as combatants. And that's not just a blow against cartels, it's a direct challenge to Maduro's government, long accused of sheltering traffickers and profiting off the drug trade. Maduro's reaction was immediate. He blasted the strike as piracy and terrorism, accusing Washington of using the war on drugs as a cover for regime change. Al Jazeera reported that he called on millions of Venezuelan militia to prepare for defense. Colombia condemned the strike as a violation of sovereignty. Trinidad and Tobago voiced support. Allies are split. And with that split comes the risk that the fallout could spread far beyond cartel routes, reshaping alignments in Latin America itself. To see how unprecedented this is, we have to look back. For decades, the United States has waged what it calls the war on drugs. But that war rarely looked like this. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan militarized anti-drug operations but emphasized interdiction and cooperation with Latin American governments. In the 1990s and 2000s, U.S. operations in Colombia, such as Plan Colombia, poured billions into aid, training, and intelligence sharing, but they did not unleash airstrikes. Barack Obama sanctioned Venezuelan officials accused of trafficking, but stopped short of military force. Even during Trump's first term, counter-cartel action was limited to designations, sanctions, and DEA operations. This strike changes all of that. It is the first U.S. airstrike against Latin American cartel suspects in history. The Wall Street Journal put it bluntly, the U.S. military has crossed a line that previous administrations avoided. By designating groups like Tren de Aragua as foreign terrorist organizations, Trump opened the door to military options that earlier presidents resisted. Legal experts are divided. Some say the president has no authority to launch strikes against traffickers abroad without congressional approval. Others argue that terrorism designations give him that power. Either way, the precedent has now been set. So why now? Why escalate from Coast Guard seizures to missiles and drones? The short answer is fentanyl and public outrage. The DEA has reported that fentanyl overdoses are now the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. U.S. intelligence says Venezuelan cartels are increasingly partnering with Mexican networks to ship fentanyl precursors, cocaine, and synthetic drugs northward. Tren de Aragua, in particular, has become notorious for its grip on migrant smuggling routes stretching from Venezuela into Colombia, Peru, Chile, and even Europe. By the summer of 2025, DEA data suggested shipments tied to Venezuela had surged, with officials warning the flow was destabilizing communities across the U.S. Trump seized on this narrative, framing it not just as a crime problem but as a national security crisis. In his announcement, he declared, "No longer will these narco-terrorists pump poison into our veins unchecked. We will strike them before they strike us." Supporters see this as long overdue. Critics see it as reckless, a dangerous precedent blurring the line between law enforcement and war. The Washington Post noted that even some senior Pentagon officials were uneasy, worried about escalation with Venezuela, where Maduro remains in power despite years of sanctions and isolation. The concern is that the U.S. isn't just fighting cartels. It is stepping into a gray zone with a sovereign state that could view these attacks as acts of war. And that's where things get even more complicated. Trump has made clear this won't be a one-off. In follow-up remarks, he promised more operations are coming. According to Politico, White House aides told Congress to expect a sustained campaign. That means more vessels could be hit, safe houses could be targeted, cartel leaders could be hunted down inside Venezuelan territory. The risks are enormous. Maduro has already mobilized militias. Colombia fears spillover. Mexico is watching closely. Caribbean states are divided. International law scholars are asking whether this violates sovereignty. And inside the U.S., Congress is demanding answers. Did Trump overstep? Was this constitutional? Should such an operation require a war declaration? The cartels themselves may adapt. Analysts warn they could shift smuggling routes, hide deeper underground, or retaliate violently. Some even fear they could respond with terror tactics, striking back at U.S. assets in the region or inside the United States itself. If that happens, America could find itself dragged into a shadow war far more dangerous than the drug seizures of the past. The bottom line is this: the U.S. has crossed a historic line, from fighting drugs with police work to fighting cartels with missiles. For some, it's a necessary escalation against organizations that have flooded America with death. For others, it's reckless brinkmanship that risks war in America's backyard. But whether you support it or fear it, one thing is clear: the game has changed. As Reuters noted, this is the most forceful U.S. military action in Latin America in decades. And whether it succeeds or backfires, its impact will be felt from Caracas to Washington, from the Caribbean to every American city touched by the drug crisis. And if that sounds like enough to take them down, just wait until you hear what else Trump and the U.S. are already planning. Before we dive into the next moves being prepared right now, make sure to subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the global events that could reshape history, because this story is far from over.